Hello and welcome to the MB Om podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the MB Om podcast. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Elsa Rose Eastabrook, and she is joining me from Ontario, Canada. And today we're talking about a lot of different things around being a yoga teacher, but specifically how to sort of find your niche, because Elsa has really found what excites her and what her passion is with yoga, and that's power yoga for sport. And because she comes from an athletic background, she's been able to really bring that background into yoga and help people who were once like her, who were very athletic and kind of needed yoga. And so today we're focusing on that, as well as business lessons she's learned along the way and advice for new yoga teachers. So this is a really fun interview, and I hope that you enjoy it. And without further ado, here's Elsa. Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to talk with you today, and I was thinking that we could start with how you first got into yoga, if you can tell me a bit about that.
Sure. Well, I actually came into yoga through my athletic background. So I was a competitive athlete. I have been on and off my whole life. And when I was 16, I was a boxer. And it was actually my coaches at the time who recommended I go and take some yoga classes. And the reason they recommended that was because I was having trouble controlling my breathing. I had a tendency to hyperventilate when I got excited or when things were sort of getting intense. I couldn't get control. I couldn't get control over that. So really kind of innovative on their part 20 years ago to say, hey, I want you to try yoga to see if you can start controlling your breathing a little bit better. So I did. I went to a couple of yoga classes at our local YMCA, and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. I was miserable going to those classes. And you can imagine, I was a 16-year-old kid, had no idea what yoga was, and I was surrounded by 60-ish-year-old women who were all, in their joggers and kind of chatting, and then they do their little yoga poses and we'd leave. I really, really hated it. The interesting thing was, though, I started to notice even back then that I was gaining something from it. So I gained these sort of like little tidbits on how to control my breath a little bit more. So there was something about it that kept me coming back. And I'd forget about it, and I'd kind of go, it's no big deal. But then if something sort of stressful would start happening again in my life, I would be steered back to this idea of going to a yoga class without really thinking too much about it. And then it wasn't until usually we all have our like big thing that happens in our lives that sort of changes things for us, or allows us to see things a little bit more clearly. And it wasn't until I had my second baby. So we had two babies at the time. And we were in a car accident. My two girls and I were hit by a car as we were crossing the street. And we're fine. We were fine. A couple of bumps and bruises and fractures, but, it was that process of healing from that made me dive deeper into my own practice. I couldn't run. I couldn't jump. I couldn't do all these things while I was trying to heal from this accident. So all of a sudden yoga started to play a bigger role in my life, to the point where it actually replaced all my other physical activity. And I fell madly in love. And wow. I never looked back. That was it. That was it for me. And it was, again, it had played such a role in my life on and off. But I hadn't really made that connection yet. My body had made the connection, my breath had made the connection, but my brain hadn't yet. And, it took that big moment in my life to go, stop and just sort of say, hey, what is it about this that is, that keeps bringing me back? It's multifaceted as far as what it is, but, yeah.
Wow.
Love.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. It's so interesting that you first did it and you're like, I hate this. I'm never doing this again. Like, I don't want to do this.
I'm beyond frustrated.
Do you think that it was, after this time where you're doing it and you're kind of just like putting the time with it and noticing small changes, and then your body actually couldn't do anything else? Do you think that was sort of the shift in your mindset, or what do you think was different for you?
It was that shift, but it was also an introduction at that time, because I happen to be a very physical person. I like to be really active all the time, and that gets me a little bonkers if I can't move around. So somebody had suggested a power yoga class. I didn't know that existed. I'd taken Iyengar, and I'd taken a couple of hot yoga classes when I lived in Vancouver, but I didn't know that there was such thing as a power yoga class where it was physically intense, and that was a big shift for me, as far as realizing that I can get what I need, my need for being active, out of this thing that also incorporates this wholeness of well-being. And it was magical. And yeah, I don't think I picked up a pair of running shoes for almost probably 5 or 6 years after.
Wow. That's amazing. And you were just able to find that like sort of energy and physical outlet in power yoga. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And it was a tremendous outlet for me at that time. Still is.
Wow. That's so cool. And then what inspired you to become a teacher?
A few different things. One was that certainly that experience of having to, the healing experience and having to really refocus on what's important in my life, gave me enough courage to say out loud, hey, I want to pursue this as a teacher, which took a lot of courage, I think, at the time. And luckily I have a spouse who was really supportive and said, yeah, okay, let's try to see if we can figure out how to make this work. And the other thing was that I knew through my own experiences and for lack of a better word, I mean, the magic that is yoga and that can be yoga, I knew I wanted to share that with other people. And I've always been so passionate and so excited about the way our body moves and the way our bodies work. And the individuality of each of us that I thought, what more perfect way to sort of combine these two, passions together and maybe make a difference in some other people's lives. That's the goal.
Yeah, definitely. And especially too, there's so many people who have like sports backgrounds like yourself who feel like yoga is not for them. And it's like yoga can be for everyone. You just have to find sort of the right style, the right teacher, the right studio.
Absolutely. Well, and I always say, yoga can be anything for anyone. Whatever you're looking for, yoga's got it. And that could be where the place that you are in your life right now. It could be the place where you are in your day right now or in your hour, just depending on what you need at that moment. Certainly yoga can take that form for you. I always, or I tend to use when I'm working with athletes, especially, I don't use the word yoga all that often. It can be quite intimidating. And some people really shy away from the idea. I'm sure you get this, and so many other teachers would hear this as well. People saying, "Oh, I'm not flexible enough to do yoga," which I always find to be the funniest thing to say. So I use the word mobility. I've switched my vocabulary in that sense, and certainly, especially when it comes to athletes, they find that word far less intimidating than the word yoga. So it's the same thing. We just use different words.
Yeah, it's so interesting how people can get caught up in a word, and I think that part of it has to do with like social media and what people see online. It's like they get the idea that yoga is some crazy back bend with a leg extended in the air or being upside down, and that if you can't do that, then you can't do yoga, which is so not true.
Absolutely.
I always think it's so funny though when people, like you said, are like, oh, I'm not flexible enough to do yoga. And I compare it to brushing your teeth. It's like when your teeth are dirty, your instinct is to brush your teeth. Like you've been taught your teeth are dirty, brush your teeth. So I'm like, your body feels tight. Why is your instinct not to stretch?
That's a great analogy. I love that. I might steal that from you.
Like, oh, my teeth are too dirty to brush them. Like what?
Really?
People would never say that.
I'm too thirsty to have a drink. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way to look at it for sure.
And so did you do your teacher training with Power Yoga Canada?
I did not. No, I did my teacher training here in London it was called Hybrid Flow, is where I got my original certification with. And so that was very Baptiste focused and influenced. And so certainly Power Yoga Canada is Baptiste influenced as well. So it's very similar roots there. But we brought in Iyengar and Hatha and all sorts of other sort of schools of yoga to focus on through that training.
Okay. And then as you've progressed in your career, have you stuck more to the power yoga, or have you branched out into other sort of areas with your teaching and your practice?
Well, certainly, I branched out in the sense that I'm just always hungry to learn more. And the more I can broaden my practice, the better. But I always figure there are so many amazing teachers who do other styles of yoga so well that I stick with what I do best. They're amazing at what they do, and I figure I'm not going to try to step on anybody's toes. So as far as my teaching is concerned, certainly I design classes that are physically challenging and focus on that idea of overcoming some of those challenges throughout your practice, for sure.
Yeah. I think that it's good to always be learning and growing and kind of like testing the waters as to what you really like teaching. But yeah, I agree with you. Like if something clicks for you and you do that well, and it's like the thing that you can get into that kind of like flow state and just do, and it feels so good, why not teach that?
Well, and certainly, as we all know, yoga, as it should be, is very popular, and it's a very saturated market for as teachers. There's a lot of us out there. So you sort of have to find your niche as a teacher. And certainly I caught on very quickly that was my niche. I was able to instruct people, to try to figure out little cues and little ways to get people to do things they didn't know they could do. And certainly that's an amazing thing to be able to do.
Yeah. I think you touched on something really important there. Like finding your niche in a saturated market is huge, especially like teacher trainings are pumping out thousands of new yoga teachers. Some don't want to teach, but many of them do want to teach. Do you have any tips for anyone who's coming out of a teacher training recently on how to find your niche if they're not quite sure what it is?
Wow, that's a great question. I think there are a couple of different things that you need to do. First of all, coming out of your teacher training, you've taken such an amazing step toward becoming a teacher. Don't stop there. So the initial teacher training is just your base, and branch out and find other teachers and find other styles and educate yourself as much as you can. Try to do another training every year. And find out more and gain more information. Information is power. The second thing is to simply be authentic. So in being yourself and being exactly truthful in the way that you're teaching, and I know when you're first starting out, that's almost impossible. I mean, we all emulate the people that we really like or are influenced by. And I know we all, when we're first starting, sort of almost are copycats. For those people that we find, influence in our own practices or our own teaching. But once you can sort of get comfortable with your own voice, being authentic, you're going to automatically find where your niche is anyway. That will come to you. And certainly you'll start getting feedback from your students saying, hey, I really liked this, or hey, I got into this that I never knew I could. I didn't know I could do wheel, or I didn't know I could do bridge. And write those things down. Write down, hey, this is what I cued, and it worked. I'm going to do that again. Certainly. Yeah.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa. Yeah. Even more so learning from the things that don't work. But yeah, certainly being authentic, continue to be hungry for education, and continue to grow your own practice. Practice what you preach. So I take myself through every class that I teach. I take myself through it first. That way I know it works. I know that we're getting what we want to get out of that practice, and out of those postures. And, and I practice what I preach.
Yeah. I think that all of those are really, really great pieces of advice. I love your advice about doing a training every year. I think that it's so important to continue learning and realizing that like a 200 hour, you're really just skimming the surface. Like I think before I did my 200 hour, I was like, I'm going to go do this and then I'm going to be a yoga teacher. And I finished and I was like, holy crap, this well is deep.
No kidding. No kidding. And it's such an, I mean, if you are hungry for knowledge, as you said, the well is so deep, it's endless. And that is so exciting. It's so exciting because in 200 hours, you can get your basic anatomy and you can get your basic postures. But once we start to really understand what's happening in the body, how the body is reacting to things, how our brains are reacting to these things, that's how you become a good teacher. That's how you can get that information across.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. It's like continuing to learn and figuring out what does work for you and what doesn't. I know some of my like most powerful teaching moments have been teaching a pose that maybe I don't teach very often or trying something new to get into it. And those moments where everyone looks at me like deer in the headlights, I'm like, okay, we're gonna do that differently next time.
Yeah, those are amazing, amazing learning moments, aren't they?
Yeah, they're so good. They're like, in the moment, they're kind of like, oh, what am I doing wrong here? Okay, let's like restart this. But later on, you can look at them and be like, okay, that was such powerful learning for myself. And the class really doesn't think too much about it as long as you can get them there eventually.
Well, and this is where your authentic self comes in handy. Because if you just bomb up there and something doesn't work at all, which happens to every one of us, but you're being really authentic in that bombing, people are going to forgive you and they won't think anything of it, because they know you and they trust you. And even if they've only known you for 15 minutes, if you're authentic, they're going to trust you. Yeah. And you'll get through it together.
Yeah, I think there's something really amazing about when somebody who's teaching a class, and this can be like any class or even within like education outside of fitness, when the teacher kind of becomes a human to the students and not just this like person that they put on a pedestal, I feel like that can be really powerful. Like some of my favorite yoga teachers, it's been moments when I've seen like this really authentic human side of them where they've like admitted that they've done something wrong or that they don't know something, where I'm like, yes, I'm coming back. Like, I really like you. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. And that's one of my goals as a teacher is to make sure that I'm very honest about those, downfalls as well.
Do you think that it's important to kind of find a balance between like finding, I guess, the balance of being authentic? Like I was just thinking about how I feel like there's kind of a line that you do have to draw with students as well. Like if you're having a bad day or there's something like really personal going on, like maybe you could acknowledge that, but not like giving too much information.
Oh, absolutely. Well, they're coming to you not to hear about your problems, or the bad day that you're having. Certainly you can be honest with people, but being able to separate yourself from that is a really important skill to have. Once you step in that room, anything that happened previously doesn't exist. That stays outside the door. And you're there as a teacher, to hold the space for other people. And that's your job. That's part of your job, right? So there has to be a separation there, certainly. And I think probably for most of us, a little bit of adrenaline as you're up in front of people and knowing you've got a really great lesson plan and you're really excited about it. You drop it anyway. You drop the baggage anyway.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. I was just thinking about how sometimes the word authenticity, people, and I use it constantly. I think it's really important to be authentic, but sometimes I think people get attached to this idea of like, okay, I need to like bare my entire soul to the world. And I think there is a difference between like being authentic and then like oversharing, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Those are two very, very different things. You can be completely authentic, while still leaving your day behind, or your week, or whatever, or you have a cold, whatever it might be. You have to leave it behind, for that time, that 90 minutes or that 45 minutes or however long you have people with you. Because that's not what they're there for. They're not there to hear about your issues. Certainly, again, you can be honest about it, but if you're having a really bad day, try to find somebody to cover your class.
Yeah.
Bring it with you.
Yeah. You can't check it at the door.
Yeah. I went, I think it was probably about 3 years ago, took a really interesting training, with a psychic. Not to tap into my psychic ability, but she was doing this training on how to get in touch with your own senses and how to separate yourself from the space that you're holding for others. So I think that those skills can be reversed as well. So this idea of if somebody else, if you've got a room full of people and maybe 5 people in that room are having a really bad day, you're holding that space for them to create room to breathe and stretch and move, and how not to take that home with you, not to take that on for them, but hold the space for them and not bring it home. I think the same thing applies to you as a teacher, holding that space and not allowing your baggage to be brought home by others.
Yeah.
If that
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. When I did my restorative teacher training, the woman who led it kind of talked about something similar, like because restorative training is like you get so deep, you get so relaxed, and she said sometimes when she did adjustments, like she felt like she was like taking on like the weight of that person's problems. And I think that's something that a lot of different teachers have talked about. Was there any particular things you learned in your training that kind of helped you as a teacher to like separate the things that are going on in the room with other people from yourself?
I think because it's sort of an abstract concept, right? This idea of holding space for people and not taking on their energy. That's a very abstract concept. That is not something that we can hold or see. But it certainly is felt, and as you said, lots of other teachers have sort of touched on this before. It's certainly something that we all can feel exists, right? This idea of holding other people's energy. So one of the things that I learned, not to get too far into this idea of your senses, but we all have a dominant sense. So sight, taste, touch, our hearing, whatever it may be, we tend to have one or maybe possibly two that are more dominant than others. And to identify that, know that that's probably where we're going to pick most things up. We're going to be most sensitive in those areas, and to learn how to shut that off as far as energy is concerned. So if your sense is most strong in what you see, your visual is really strong, to not focus on maybe a facial expression that you're seeing or a certain movement that might trigger something for you. So you just understanding those, what are your triggers, I guess, more than anything else. And that's a little bit of self-exploration as well, and learning and figuring out what your own triggers are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's super interesting. I was just thinking about like the way that I learn and that sort of stuff. I was like, wow, that's so cool to think about. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a little
fascinating
bit of work.
Training.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of work, but a guided meditation through your senses will allow you to understand which one is your dominant. So if you're guided through in a meditation where you are touching on each of your senses, the one that comes through the strongest for you, that's likely your dominant sense.
Okay. Wow. That's super interesting.
I thought so.
Yeah. I've never heard of a training like that before. That's really cool. I feel like that would be helpful, like for a career in yoga as well, and just for life in general. Like,
absolutely,
because there's so many when you start like getting into like neuro linguistic programming or like stuff like that, you realize that there's all these little facial things that we do and like body language things, and some people are so much more sensitive to that than other people are.
Absolutely.
My boyfriend's always like, you raised your eyebrow in a way that makes me feel like you're upset. I'm like, I didn't. I'm not upset. He's like, you are.
Yeah, but he's picking up on a cue there. Yeah. It may or may not be real.
Yeah. Anyways, getting back to sort of the progression of your career. So you started teaching and you kind of niched in on teaching more of power yoga. And then something I found really interesting on your website is you started teaching to athletic performance. Is that right? Yes,
I did. So I started, I was lucky enough in the beginning of my teaching career to get hired on right by the studio that I was taking my teacher training with. It also happens to be the busiest studio in the city. So lucky in that sense to, as a brand new green teacher, to have an opportunity to have a platform like I did. So the studio has, a 60-person capacity. And I was teaching as much as I possibly could, 3 or 4 classes a day. So I'd be seeing, over 100 faces every day. What an amazing platform as a brand new teacher to have. This allowed me to, gain a lot of experience really quickly. As you said, find my niche very quickly and create a following very quickly. What I started to notice more and more often is that I had athletes coming to my classes. We have our university here is Western University, and all of the Western athletes, the rugby players and the basketball players and the cheerleaders were all coming as groups into my classes. And I loved it. I loved it because it spoke to me. As a former and current athlete myself, I get it. I speak their language, right? And I was so excited that they were interested in this aspect of physical. For them, it was physical recovery or active recovery. They were coming on their days off. So as that progressed and I spent a few years at that studio, my goal, when you make your vision boards, as we all do, my goal, big front and center, was always to not be stagnant. I always want to continue to grow. I always want to continue to learn and keep moving forward. And I felt I wanted to continue to find more of what my niche might be. So I started to branch off on my own. It was a big leap of faith for me to leave that studio and say, I'm going to try to do something on my own here and leave that platform that had been provided for me for a few years. So that was a really difficult decision to make and decide to go, I'm going to focus more on athletes and this idea of yoga as active recovery for a complement to what they're already doing. So the best way I could figure out how to do that and train myself properly in that aspect was to go to New York and study under a woman named Gwen Lawrence. And Gwen has been the yoga teacher for 17 years for New York pro teams like the Jets and the Giants and the Rangers.
Wow.
And the Nets. Yeah, she's got a stronghold on all of the pro teams in New York. So when I had an opportunity to go study with her and be certified with her, I couldn't pass that up. And I went and spent time with her in New York and came back as the only Canadian with that certification. I shouldn't say I came back. It took 2 years to get the certification. But eventually have now become the only Canadian with that certification. So that's really exciting. And it gave me the tools, and especially, I think, more than anything, the language to understand how to work with athletes in a capacity that isn't intimidating, first of all, for them, and a way that works to complement so well what they're already doing. They're so demanding physically. So this whole approach to, it's still power yoga, but it's not a regular yoga class that we're doing. But it's been an absolute blast trying to figure out how to make this all work, and we're making it work.
That's really cool. So if somebody comes into that class, like what does it look like in comparison to your average power yoga class?
Well, first of all, for the most part, I'm not teaching in the Power for Yoga for Sports. Not teaching in a public class, so it's not a drop-in situation. For the most part, I'm going to facilities. I'm working with athletes one-on-one in their homes or in their training facilities, or working with coaches and the full team. Sometimes I'm out on a field, a soccer field or a rugby field, or sometimes I'm on a track, depending on where everybody can meet me. But I do actually have a couple of Power Yoga for Sports classes that are drop-in, that people can just come in and join. And I think, as I said a little while ago, I market it more as mobility than yoga. Most athletes don't have any interest in the word yoga, but they do have an interest in the word mobility. And I say most because certainly there are lots of athletes who have a tremendous interest in yoga. But if they don't already have that established, as I said, it's sort of an intimidating word for a lot of people. But they do have an interest in mobility. That's been sort of grinded in at some point, that you have to stay mobile, you have to stay flexible, otherwise you're going to get injured. So I can provide that for them, and then I sneak all the mindfulness in without telling them, and it ends up working. So what it looks like, more than anything, if it's a private class, it's designed for that sport particularly. So each class is designed individually for either the sport or the athlete, especially when there are sports where there are different positions, and a team, a goalie is doing a lot different, is moving their body in a much different way than, say, a forward. I talk about hockey because that's we're Canadian. So there's a big difference in what we're focusing on there. Their mobility is different and their areas of tightness are different. But if it's a drop-in class where I'm just getting, like last week I had 4 OHL or Ontario Hockey League referees come and visit me, which was awesome, and a couple of other skaters and a few soccer players. So in that situation, I've got an array of different people who are all challenging their bodies in different ways. But there are certain things that always sort of stay the same or that they have in common. So I'll focus on those areas. Our feet and our hamstrings and our hips are always going to be, target areas for pretty much any athlete who's moving in that way. So it's hard to sort of say it looks like this because each class is so individual. But that's part of the fun of doing this.
Yeah.
is certainly tailoring what I'm teaching or where we're targeting in these athletes it makes my day really interesting.
Yeah.
And really fun.
It sounds like every class would be so different, which is really, really cool. I was just thinking about how much you must have had to learn. Did you shadow Gwen around as she went to the different pro teams? Is that kind of how you learned about the sports that you didn't know personally, or?
I did. So I got to shadow her. Yes. I didn't get to go visit all the pro teams. They don't let just anybody come in.
I guess. I didn't even think about that fact.
Yeah, no. That would have been awesome if they let me do that. But we did have lots of collegiate level athletes who came in, and we got to work with them. I got to watch what she did. Mostly, I, as you said, shadowed, so I would come in and assist the class. But when I came back and continued on with the certification, that's where all of that experience built up for me. So I just used all the contacts I could possibly find for anybody that I knew who did any kind of athletics, and asked if I could come and teach a yoga class for them. And luckily lots of people said yes. and ended up being, some of them ended up being, some of my regular clients. So that's great. But yeah, so it was just, I was just making cold calls basically and just saying, hey, I'm looking to do this, and I'm gaining my certification this way. Give me feedback. Let me film you, because I had to hand in, myself, movies of myself doing all of this so they could be graded.
That's intimidating.
It is, yeah. And actually part of my training, oddly enough, which a lot of people thought was pretty big bonus, was that I had to watch a certain amount of hours of sports on TV.
I guess you're studying the way they move, right?
Exactly. So I had to, any kind of sport that I thought I might be working with, I'd have to watch it on TV and analyze it and come up with different yoga poses that would work as a counteraction to the way they were moving their bodies, which was such an interesting activity to do. But that was a big part of the training as well.
Yeah. I mean, it'd be so different from just like sitting down to watch a hockey game with like a beer and some popcorn and just like, watching the puck go back and forth, cheering when like your team scores. It'd be so different to watch the actual way that the players move their bodies.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think my husband was pretty excited about that idea and then quickly realized that I was stopping and starting things and we weren't really paying attention to the score or anything like that. He kind of lost interest after a while.
That's so funny. You kind of touched on what I was going to ask you next, but you said like cold calling was a way that you got clients, but I was going to ask like how you went about actually like getting the people to who you are now teaching. Like, what was that process like?
That it's always hard. The cold calling is something that I was never comfortable with, but have been trying to get more comfortable with it. I'm still not there.
It's one of the most awkward things ever.
It's the most awkward things, absolutely. And somebody told me, this is how inexperienced I am with the business aspect of yoga. Somebody said to me, you have to come up with an elevator pitch. And I had no idea what an elevator pitch was. So they had to explain that to me. It's something you could explain what you do in the course of an elevator ride. So that took me, I'm going to say 6 weeks of solid work to come up with an elevator pitch, come up with the things that I would say. And I think I probably had 70 different versions of what I would say. And it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to market yourself. Yeah. So I think the most effective way to market yourself is word of mouth. And certainly that's what I rely on most heavily, is just getting my foot in the door and then other people talking about it and recommending me. And that's basically how I've gotten most of the work that I have now is through word of mouth.
Is that something you make like a call to action for when you're working with a client? Like, oh, if you know somebody else who might find this useful.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. Coaches are the best to work with as far as word of mouth, especially when you're working with a bigger team and there's multiple coaches. And there's, of course, especially at the collegiate level, there's going to be a men and women's team. So, I started working with the women's rugby team at Western University, and through a contact, somebody said, "Hey, I know the Western coach," and I said, "Hey, can you let them know what I'm doing and see if he'd be interested in having me?" So I did a free class for them. I said, "Let me do it for free. I'll show you what I can do, and you tell me what you think." And they hired me on as a recovery coach. And then so at that point, then I said, "So do you know the coach for the men's team? Are you guys buddies? Do you think this is something he would be interested in as well?" Again, it's getting over that fear. And I think the most important thing that I've learned through this process, and I still fear it every time my heart starts to race, every time I know I'm about to make a pitch, I just start to get sweaty. But the thing that I've learned most is, follow up is everything. Always follow up. If I could give one piece of advice for somebody who's trying to market themselves in this way, if you make a contact, follow up. It's really important.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice, because it's like, it's this massive thing to you. And like, I'm the same way. If I have to like start talking about things I do, I'm like, okay, my palms are sweaty. My heart's racing like a little bit faster. my speech is getting quicker. Like, take a breath, slow down. But it's like this big thing to you. And then you pitch it to somebody and they're like, okay, yeah, cool. Like I'll let them know. It's like no big thing to them. But then if you don't follow up with them, they might just forget, because it's not like their thing.
Exactly. And certainly, especially when it comes to athletics, in Canada especially, yoga is just becoming a trend. In the States, it's been a trend for a while. Certainly, there's a lot of mindfulness that has started to become really common ground as far as athletics are concerned. In Canada, we're a little bit further behind than they are in the States, but it is becoming very trendy. So this is not a new concept for most coaches or most athletes, this idea of bringing yoga into your training. But it's just a concept for most people at this point. It's not something that a lot of athletes or a lot of coaches have had experience with. So when I pitch this idea, or I put that little seed in there, you're exactly right. There's this like, oh yeah, I've thought about that before. But there isn't a lot of afterthought to it. So if I follow up again, and I know if it feels like you're being annoying or you're being too persistent or whatever it is, but fight that instinct and know that the seed has been planted, and it needs to be a little bit nurtured. It needs to have a little bit of sunlight put on it before it starts to grow.
Yeah, definitely. I like it too when people kind of like are like, oh, thanks for the push. Like I kind of needed it. It's just been this email sitting. It always makes me feel a little bit better about like, okay, I gave you a nudge, and if somebody's like, hey, thanks, I needed that nudge.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you.
Awesome. And then are there any other business lessons that you've kind of learned through your career?
Oh, there are a few. Yes. As I said before, that big leap of faith that I took in pursuing my career further and sort of learning more and growing more, going from having a platform provided for me to basically starting at ground zero with my own business. I've never regretted it. I certainly sometimes miss that room full of people who are all sweaty and eager to move and to learn how to do a handstand. And I still do get to teach regular yoga classes, power yoga classes at studios. So I do get that opportunity. Still, I haven't fully let go of that aspect of my practice or teaching. But I've never regretted that decision, even though it's been challenging and there's been so many different obstacles along the way, and continue to be so many obstacles. And but follow your instinct. Follow, again, your authentic self, because if you don't, you're going to become stagnant. You're not going to love what you're doing. So taking that leap of faith is scary, but worth it. I always say a challenge is a learning opportunity, and we don't gain knowledge without a little bit of loss. So there's a balance there, right? As we move forward, there's always something that we have to sacrifice. That might be a little bit of fear. It might be some time. You're sacrificing some or a lot of time to dedicate to this goal. But whatever it is, there's always a balance there, and to not let that be an obstacle, not let that loss be the obstacle, but the gain that you are getting from that loss. Allow that to be the goal.
Cool. I love that.
Thanks.
Yeah. And then is there anything else that you've learned kind of along the way?
Oh, let people help you. I had when I knew I wanted to work with athletes especially, but I did go through a phase or a stage where I thought I wanted to open my own yoga studio. I think more than anything, just because I thought that's what I have to do if I want to regain my following. If I want to rebuild my community, I'm going to have to provide a space to do that. And I went as far as to have a business plan and have investors and have a space and have a team. And I had it all ready to go. And the architect made up the blueprints and I was about to sign it. And I stopped. and I looked around and I had a great team around me. And I thought, what am I doing this for? I have 2 young kids who, as we were talking before we started the interview, I'm in a golden zone of parenting right now where they still want me around. And I only have a few more years of that left. And I thought, really, do I want to be spending these years trying to build a business, one that, statistically is likely to fail because so many yoga studios are unsuccessful, and the same thing as restaurant industry or anything else. I mean, it's really hard to build a business. And it was the people around me at that time, and their support and their encouragement, that allowed me to be actually brave enough to not sign those papers and go, I'm stepping away. Again, a strange decision and a strange way to learn that lesson. But the people around me, had I not accepted their advice and their help, I probably would have ended up in a much different situation, than I'm in now. And yeah, so don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for advice. And yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably the most important part.
Yeah. That's an amazing thing for people to remember. I think that, when you said I think I wanted to own a studio because it seems like the thing to do, that's something that I found really peculiar in my yoga teacher training. When, it kind of gets to the end and we're all talking about what we want to do. And so many people were like, well, yeah, I think I'll just open a yoga studio. That's, that's what you do. That's how you make money as a yoga teacher. And yeah. I was like, that's a business. Do you want to run a business and have a team of employees and have to do taxes and accounting on that and payroll? And they're like, well, no, I just want to teach yoga. Yeah. I don't think that you understand what this is. And not that I know all the ins and outs of owning a yoga studio because I don't own one, but, yeah, it was something I found so peculiar about the yoga world. And I think that it was probably way harder for you at that point to step back from that than it would have been to just sign the papers and go forward. It
was very challenging. But again, it comes back to that balance of loss versus gain, right? In order to gain what I thought would be, a community, or recreate that community, I was losing so much. The loss was greater than the gain for me, in my opinion, at that point. And really it was that weighing, of those two things that made me step back and say, I'm going to lose more by doing this than I will gain. And so I need to find a different way to do it.
Yeah.
And I did.
Yeah. And now you go to their, to the athletes' places of business and you teach out of their facilities as opposed to them coming to yours.
You got it. Yeah. And it works better for them. As far as schedule is concerned, it makes it more accessible for them because I'm coming to them in their training facilities, or, after game day, I'm there for their recovery. So, it turned out that worked so much better for what I wanted to do anyway. And having the physical space was just for my own ego. It was just for my own thinking. I need that in order to seem legit.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's ego is constantly getting in the way, right? It's sitting on our shoulder, constantly being you should do this. You'll look better.
Right. Yeah. And I thought, yeah, exactly. I thought I wouldn't be taken seriously if I didn't have my own studio, right? If I was just a contractor, basically, how could I be taken seriously? And it turns out that was just, a doubt that I had in my head. It's not a reality at all.
Yeah. I think that there's certain things that can kind of put out this I don't know, like a signal or like an air of like, okay, like I am a certain level of teaching because I own a yoga studio. But I think that at the end of the day, it's about being a good yoga teacher. So even if you have a good yoga or a nice yoga space or a yoga studio, if people come and you're not giving them what they need, you're not going to be successful. And you can be just as successful without that space if you can provide them the value out of your teaching. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And anyone could own a yoga studio. You don't have to even be a yoga teacher to open a studio. So owning a studio doesn't make you a good teacher.
Yeah. I just did an interview with a guy who was saying that he works for a yoga studio in LA, and he's like, I don't even know who owns it anymore. Like, it's a bunch of people who have just invested. And same with a yoga studio that I practiced at a ton in Atlanta. One of my best friends down there still works there, and the owner sold it. And now it's two people who have just business investment again.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like it's happening more and more. I don't know that it's happening as much in Canada, but it seems like that's happening quite a bit in the States.
Yeah, and it would make sense. I mean, honestly, if you're going to own a yoga studio and do it properly, you're probably not going to have time to teach classes anyway. So you might as well be a business person as opposed to a yoga teacher if you're gonna really invest in a business in that way.
Yeah, definitely. Amazing. Well, do you have anything else that you want to share with listeners about any business lessons you've learned or any pieces of advice for new yoga teachers?
Yeah, well, I think I've summed up basically a lot of my experiences. I maybe just reiterating that following your passion, following what makes you excited, is probably your best bet. Continue to educate yourself. Find teachers who you love and continue to be inspired by them. And I travel all over the place to follow my favorite teachers, and I have different ones for different reasons. Catherine Budig makes me feel like a goddess, and I follow her to the end of the earth.
I love her.
I know. She's amazing, and I've done lots of trainings with her, and she's just fabulous. But if I need a really good, logical, this is how this works, and this is why it will result in this, I'm going to go to Jason Crandall. I'm going to go see him in a couple of months, actually, and spend some time with him and really gain some solid, useful knowledge. And it's great to have those balances, right? I've got this one side that just makes you feel powerful and excited and inspired, and this one other side that makes me feel like I can really apply this in a way that is logical, in a way that will change people. So find those balances, find those things that inspire you, find those people that inspire you, and really make that your community. And you can thrive from that.
I love that. That's such a good piece of advice. I feel like sometimes it's like people get attached to, I have to practice with this person because they're in this town that I live in, or, I should do this. And it's like, just find people that excite and inspire you and practice with them and learn from them.
Exactly. And if you can't afford to travel, go online. There's classes. You can find your favorite teacher, and get inspired that way. But certainly, keep growing and keep learning. You won't regret it. You'll never regret it.
Cool. I love that. That's such a good piece of advice. And so if people want to learn more about you, where can they go to find out more about you and your offerings?
You can visit my website at eastabrookyoga.com. And there on the website, it sort of explains, how I work with athletes and why, and, we can, set up some times to work together. Or I'm on Facebook or Instagram, Eastabrook Yoga as well. And I'm working now, on doing some online classes. So those will be coming up really soon. Doing a series of from more basic stuff all the way up to more advanced power yoga.
Amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Elsa. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been so fun talking to you.
You too, Amanda. Thanks.
All right. So I hope that everyone enjoyed that episode as much as I did. I had so much fun recording it with Elsa and I learned so much from her. So definitely go check her out at eastabrookyoga.com. As always, there will be a link with photos and everything that we talked about on the show notes up at www.mbomyoga.com. And you can join the community on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And don't forget to sign up for the monthly newsletter up on the website. As always, thanks so much for listening and namaste.